Good afternoon, and thanks very much for the invitation. I appreciate it to QED and others. And let's first say I should introduce myself, I suppose. I'm Peter Skinner. I'm a European MEP at the Labour Party in the southeast of England. I've been on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee for, I think, 16 years, since it's really existed in the financial services area anyway. It used to be a monetary affairs subcommittee, if you can really believe that now, where we used to attend to these issues as almost a sidebar to the industrial issues that occurred inside the EU at the time. There was a very red-haired, flaming red-haired woman called Rancio Platt, Krista Rancio Platt, for anyone who remembers her, who was chair of that committee, who was quite adamant and strong about, why this committee, this subcommittee, was so important and where it would lead to. What is intriguing and interesting is during the Eurozone crisis, we may be referring to the single market in one breath, but then we may also be talking about the Eurozone in another. And there may be another subcommittee to emerge in the Parliament. We wait and see. I'm sure people would always be pleased to hear controversial subjects like people wanting to press ahead with a minority of countries or a majority of countries doing certain things and a minority of other countries doing others. Seems to me to be a ticket for disaster. We'll see how that goes. Frankly, because the single market, just like the topic we're going to discuss today, is so essential for all of us at EU level and at a global level to get right. And if you excuse certain partners from playing a role in that, then you're really asking for a level of detail, a level of worth, a level of value to be excluded from in terms of the principal discussion, and it does you no good whether you're on one side of the argument or another. So just to let you know where I sit on that. On the surface, the fact that advanced modernised legislation has occurred and is being enacted worldwide is a great development. And in the wake of the crisis, politicians recognise that the regulatory climate that they were living in did not provide adequate protection to consumers and taxpayers. Legislators worked closely to close the loopholes and nail down definitions and crack down on the deficiencies in the system. That's what we say, anyway. However, a parallel problem emerged. More regulation does not necessarily mean better regulation. We have now a multiple regulatory issue in terms of the regimes. We now have to match that up. Definitions are similar, but not identical. And indeed, should we go from the envelope of what the FSB, the G20 told us we should be doing to where we are now, we might not have imagined that we would be in this complicated scheme where so many loose ends were flapping around. So it has to be said that, when we're dealing with particularly foreign undertakings inside the European space, it is clear that these definitions and these meanings will actually have greater impact, particularly as they have domestic or home regimes which will be asking them to do different things. The first question I'd like to think about is the current state of the new trading landscape. It's still taking shape. And in the years since 2008, regimes worldwide took a second look at their regulatory models. Many were not as up-to-date as they needed to be and required a significant overhaul. Some regions did it. Specific pieces of legislation like MiFID, CRD4, or indeed other pieces within the EU, or perhaps, as was done in the US, a sweeping piece of legislation like the Dodd-Frank bill in the US. Indeed, I think this is part of the dichotomy. A salami-sliced process, a methodology which suits perhaps our legislative process, but doesn't actually match what's going on in other regimes. It's rather difficult to try to undo 200 years of history in the United States, but we maybe could do something about it inside the EU as we're developing our processes to consider just how we would like to match and how we'd like to gear up to face those particular models. And what it does is it leads to deviations because of the cultural and political values that each of those regimes have, because of the mandates the individual politicians and regulators have, and because there is a multiplicity of regulators. Let's start with that. Some of whom have good powers or are competent, some of whom are given great number of resources or starved of resources for whatever political reason you could imagine. This is all not very good for dealing with a crisis or talking about how we take the modern state of regulation forward. There is also the issue of barriers, like implementation. The risk of not implementing our legislation in a harmonised way poses significant unintended consequences. I think, as much of this is about percentage of flow across borders, I have to say that, when you get a margin of this wrong, even a fraction of a percent, it's in millions of dollars that you finally calculate the bill. The transatlantic market alone is enormous. Can we afford to allow the differences in application to grow and grow, and then the costs to also grow at the same level? I don't think we can. Differences in capital requirement, institutional structures, or data protection laws can cause potential problems. Compare EMIR and Title 7 of the Dodd-Frank bill. They both regulate derivatives funding and trading, yet their approach is quite different. And derivatives are heavily traded across the Atlantic. So, this is something we should aim at getting entirely right. We know very well the personalities behind this, and we hear very well about where people want to go. But it is really rather more that the regimes at the very centre, the Commission, the Treasury and others, should start to get a grip. Maybe we can see something in a comprehensive barrier-lifting agreement between the EU and the US to include prudential micro-supervision, which may help elevate some of the discussion to a point where we can alleviate those circumstances. Because as every region sets its own rules, and around the world they set their rules, they will be looking entirely at the EU-US reaction to those regulations. And if it is a case that we're unable to develop those rules in concert and apply them in a harmonious fashion, converging towards equivalence in a way that we would hope would work, then I'm afraid those other countries will simply look for the other issue, arbitrage, and wonder just how their competitive markets can do better at the expense of the two quarrelling regimes. So I think this is quite essential if we are to set international standards without the purpose of sounding arrogant about what the EU can do or can't do, or what the US has been long doing and we should follow. I hope that you will join me on this journey, on this cause, and we'll get some interesting debate and discussion. I'm looking forward to some of the questions. And that was just a taster, perhaps, of what the Parliament is currently doing, what we hope to do, where we need to go. And, as a Brit, it sounds funny to say this sometimes, but, it's an EU experience. It is not a, market experience in one country or the other. The market is not a national market, it's an international market. And whilst we long quarrel about its location, it becomes to me an absurd argument, by the way, location. It really should be about where we can best protect our interests and promote the best standards. And I think that's an EU experience, not a Eurozone experience, not a French experience, not a British experience. It's everybody's value and everybody's experience. Thank you very much. Thank you.